What up, gamers? Welcome back to Gamers Bay, and the topic of today's video is, can video games really make you violent? Okay, for starters, we've heard like a million arguments surrounding the controversy over violence in video games. You've got critics who say that violence in video games should be banned from the United States entirely, from the public. You had a pastor this last year who told women, go home and take your husband's Xbox and throw it in the bathtub because the Xbox is the devil, it's evil. So there's just a lot of controversy. We've had all these American Pediatric Association has released numerous studies where they claim that there's a link between video games and violence and all this stuff. Well, you know what? We're going to put these arguments to rest today, right now. And instead of looking at ridiculous studies that don't paint facts and they're just paint controversy, if anything, we're going to look at what's logical and what actually makes sense. There's one word in the title of this video that is going to forever crush the argument that video games can, quote, make you violent. And that keyword is make. Yes. Why? Because video games can't make you do anything. Humans make their own decisions. We are responsible for our own actions. You can't blame a video game. Does a video game hold a gun to your head and force you to be violent or to do anything? No, of course not. We're the ones that dictate what our video games do, not the other way around. Okay? We play the games. The games don't play us. That's not how it works. And you can't blame a game for causing violence, okay? Some people are just short-wired and they just have a tendency to be violent. If you want to try to say blame that on video games, that's a really ridiculous argument. It makes absolutely no sense. Because like I said, you can't make somebody do anything. They make their own choices. Video games don't make you violent. They may have an influence on you. Now that's another subject, okay? And I'm going to read some excerpts off here from several different articles, including one that I wrote several years ago, where I made a huge point about how video games can have an influence on us just as anything else in our environment, but at the same time, people make their own choices, people make their own decisions, and your actions are based on your own decisions. And a video game cannot make you do that, and that's a fact. So that's what a lot of the arguments don't look at. They're not looking at what's logical, what makes sense, what are the actual facts, rather than bullshit studies. Okay, so from the article itself, it states, video games and violence. It's the controversial subject that's been spinning arguments aimlessly through the media for decades. It's long been a subject of heated debate that's often fueled by a circus of assumptions and mere speculation, rather than logical facts and educated opinions. While there's no question that video games today often do portray violent storylines and depict the unthinkable, many have failed to realize it's purely fantasy those games depict and not the reality we actually live in our everyday lives. And that's what it is. Video games, it's make-believe, it's fantasy, it's not real life, okay? Now, as far as what influence they have on people being positive or negative, that's another thing. We're going to get to that in just a second here. So the question still remains, can video games really make people violent? Can they really turn harmless souls into cold-blooded killers? While there are a billion opinions surrounding this subject, I would like to point out a few good facts for which you can judge for yourselves. Okay, so violence, human nature, and video games. While it may be true that there have been a number of factual reports in which individuals have admitted to resulting to violence after playing games like Slender, which is true, this doesn't support the idea that video games actually make someone violent. The fact is, nothing makes anyone do anything, as people make decisions on their own free will, regardless of the world of influence that surrounds them. It's basic psychology, really. It's common sense, regardless of what or who you interact with and what influence they have on you. All decisions you make are still of your own doing and no one else's. So common sense psychology essentially throws the whole idea of video games making people violent right out with the trash. But this doesn't necessarily mean that video games have no negative influence on those who play them. While no one can make anyone do anything, what we interact with as humans in this world can definitely have an influence on us. As humans, we are truly a product of our environment, at least to some degree. And that makes sense. We are kind of a product of our environment. The world does have, the environment in which we live, the people that we interact with, they do have an influence on us. For instance, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Everybody smokes cigarettes, okay? I still smoke cigarettes today. Everybody there drinks coffee. I still drink coffee. There's a cultural significance here. The life, the environment around me definitely impacted who I am today. Okay? But either way, there's a huge difference between the statements making and influence. Okay? There's a huge difference between these two terms. Okay? Like I said, video games don't make you do anything. Now, they can have an influence. Anything can have the power to influence our behavior, but not the power to make our decisions. That is up to us, and anyone who believes differently is an absolute fool. So, if video games can't make us violent, then how can they influence us negatively to act violently? The fact is, some people are easily influenced by anything, and some humans are truly short-wired, mentally deranged, have little self-control, and are naturally violent to begin with, which is true. You got people who are just short-wired naturally, and to say that because they played a video game that influenced their tendency to be violent is just ridiculous. As far as these types of individuals go, yes, it would be likely they could become violent and enraged after playing a game. Then again, they probably become just as likely to become violent and enraged after watching a rerun of the Smurfs or eating a bowl of Cheerios. So really, anything's going to make these people, just explode. You got people who are short-wired. It really doesn't matter if it's something positive or negative that they interact with. It doesn't matter. They're still going to be violent. They still have a bad temper. They still have hatred towards humanity. You're not going to break that. It's got nothing to do with video games. And the fact is, there's truly no rhyme or reason to violence, except for the fact that those who commit such atrocities all share one thing in common: a lack of self-control and self-awareness. While I've played more violent games in my days than I could ever count, I'm the last person you'll ever see get violent, which is true. I play violent games all the time. Look, we're watching a video of Left 4 Dead. This is a custom map, by the way. It's called Devil Mountain. It's a custom campaign that I recently installed and started playing. Yeah, you got zombies in here. You're running around with a guitar, with a machete, and you're hacking zombies' heads off. You've got a shotgun. You can blow their heads into smithereens. You've got all these special infected and stuff. Yes, there's blood. Yes, there's violence. Yes, there's gore. But it's fantasy. It's not real. And if people can't tell the difference between what is fantasy and what is reality, then I don't know what to say. Maybe they belong in a mental hospital. My friends play violent games too. Does this make them violent as well? I mean, this is just nonsense. And, what about the studies? What about the studies surrounding the subject of violence in video games? Okay, here, let's look at one. In one study encompassing the exposure of children to video games is noted in an article from Time entitled "Violent Video Games Make Us More Aggressive." JAMA Pediatrics claimed that children who spent more time playing games were more likely to exhibit violent tendencies versus those who were subjected to less time playing them. The trick keyword here is likely, which, guess what, means absolutely jack shit when it comes to real science. Real science is based on facts, not on likelihood. In fact, the word likely is about as factual as the word maybe, and neither leads to an end result that's truly logical. They are not facts. Likely is not a fact. Maybe is not a fact. Okay? It does not lead to an end result. It's called bullshit. That's what it is. And the problem with the study is that it does not take into account other factors that can both negatively or positively influence an adolescent's behavior or a person's behavior, such as the ethical and moral support of a child's family, their environment, and the influence of their peers, etc. Simply creating a study that claims children with more exposure to violent video games have a higher tendency for violence obviously doesn't take into account the factors mentioned above, or bother to take into consideration at all how these children are affected by the circumstances that influence their lives. The fact is, humans themselves have resorted to violence since the very beginning of mankind, and for most of our human existence there truly was no such thing as a video game. So how do you blame the violence through all the ages, tens of thousands of years of humanity, and all the violence we've seen? Look at the Crusades. Look at Adolf Hitler. Okay? Hitler had no access to video games. They did not exist during his time. And yet he was clearly a sociopath and had a tendency for being extremely violent. So there's just no link there. Likewise, children who live in poverty appear to have a higher tendency for being violent than those children who live financially secure lives, and it's not without cause. Okay, the children who live in impoverished neighborhoods often come from families where the parents themselves are demoralized by their past and present state of financial decay. We are all only human, and when humans are subjected to extreme amounts of stress, it's been shown throughout history that those who live under these extreme levels of stress can quickly lose sight of their moral and ethical standards, and it can definitely affect their current behavior. It's true. We're all only human. You know, people can only take so much stress, and after so long they're going to snap. And people who suffer through long periods of financial stress often, they get depressed. Okay, depression often leads to anger. What does anger lead to? Anger often leads to violence. So there is a link there, but you can't blame that on video games. Now, the breakdown of moral and ethical reasoning could be a good explanation as to why impoverished neighborhoods in the U.S. tend to have much higher rates of crime and violence. But this doesn't mean that a poor child's exposure to video games will make them an instant killer. I think we can all agree on that. That being said, it's more likely that violence is the end result of a demoralized society more so than it is our use of video games. Okay, so that's what we live in today, a demoralized society. You have people killing each other for money. You have people ripping each other off. You have people lying. We have politicians who are screwing America. We have banks that are robbing America blind. This is really this demoralized state of decay. And, people want to blame our societal problems on the first thing that comes to mind. It's so easy to point fingers at violence in a video game because it depicts violence, right? Well, again, that's bullshit. Video games don't make you do anything. You make your own choices. I know plenty of people who play violent video games. They're not violent. It's just garbage. And, some countries, such as Australia, have gone as far as to outright ban violent video games from the marketplace altogether. In one case, this game, Left 4 Dead itself, was actually originally banned in Australia. Yes, it was flat out banned due to its violent nature. Eventually, lawmakers let the game slide through, but not until developers changed the color of blood from red to green. Yes, you can look up the videos on YouTube and you'll actually see the green blood in some of the videos. And that's because Australia actually banned Left 4 Dead, which I think is just crazy, but hey, each to each their own, All being said, video games don't force people to pretend they're Slender Man or lash out at those around them after a long heated game of bashing zombies in Left 4 Dead 2. Again, people make their own decisions on their own free will, regardless of any external influences of any kind. While big media would like to point fingers at the gaming industry as the purveyors of a violent society, their lack of common sense speaks louder than words. In the end, anything can have an influence on you, positively or negatively. But every choice you make is ultimately your own, regardless of who you are. So there you have it. You know, it's the word make that literally throws the entire argument in the trash. You know, how does a video game make you do anything? It can't. Can it have an influence on us? Yes. As I stated earlier, yes, it can definitely have an influence on us. But, you know, it's up to us to determine what that influence is. You know, there's a lot of things in our environment influences. Sometimes, you know, as a teenager, we all hung out with the wrong people. We hung out with the wrong crowds. You know, we made bad decisions. It's a learning experience. But you don't blame, you know, the demoralization of society on something that's obviously make-believe and is not even real to begin with. Okay? And if we look at the articles, like here's one article from CNN. And in this article, Whitney DeCamp, an associate professor of sociology at Western Michigan University, says, quote, "The evidence points to either no relationship between playing video games and violent behavior, or it has an insignificant link between the two. Sure," he stated, "some studies have revealed a connection between kids playing violent video games and violent behavior, but there is a problem with looking at those two things in a vacuum. Kids who like to play brutal video games may have a predisposition already towards aggression." And see, that's what a lot of these studies don't take into account. That's what a lot of these stories in media don't take into account. These kids may already have a predisposition to being violent. So the real question is, does playing violent video games actually cause a person to act violently? And in Whitney DeCamp's study, his own study, he examined that question using data from the 2008 Delaware School Survey, which included responses from 6,567 8th graders. And among those questions, students were asked whether they had played violent video games in the past year. DeCamp factored out the propensity to play violent video games due to a natural attraction to brutality, along with other factors such as gender and family relations. He discovered that playing violent video games, no matter how bloody, did not predict violent behavior in children. In fact, another associate professor and co-chairman of the Department of Psychology at Stetson University, Christopher Ferguson, also stated that he supports this view as well. In fact, he goes so far as to suggest that violent video games may help reduce societal violence rather than increase it. And his argument is really, really good. This really makes sense. And he states, basically, by keeping young adults busy with things that they like, and this would include everything from playing sports, collecting stamps, to playing first-person shooter video games, you're effectively keeping them off the streets and out of trouble. It's true. If you have something constructive to do, you're less likely to get yourself in trouble because you're preoccupied. He also added that newer studies with better methods have typically failed to find much evidence of a connection between brutal games and even minor aggressive acts, let alone violence. So there you have it. You know, can video games make people violent? No, they can't. Why? Because humans make their own freaking decisions. That's why. Video games cannot make you do anything. No one can make you do anything. If you act violently or you're aggressive in nature, that is your own damn fault. You know, maybe, you know, the people that are like that, like I said, you know, they get mad after eating a bowl of Cheerios, they watch a rerun of the Smurfs, and they just want to see the world burn. Okay, so yeah, they're obviously screwed up. They got dropped in the head too many times as a baby. Who knows? Anyways, back to the article from CNN. Persuasive evidence comes from an economic study published in January which looked at violent criminal offenses in the weeks following the release of popular video games. Tracking both sales and crime rates, the authors discovered that general societal violence decreased in the weeks after the appearance of a new edition of a popular violent video game title. So there you have it. Every time a really popular and violently themed video game hits the market, societal violence actually drops. Crime rates actually drop because people are preoccupied with playing these games. You know, this doesn't completely rule out that, you know, like I said, anything can have an influence on us, but I think it's really far-fetched to blame video games, you know, for causing violence in humans. It's an argument that doesn't make any sense. It needs to stop, and I hope that, you know, we can look beyond all these ridiculous studies. Like I said, studies are not facts. When you read a study in an article, anyone who's college educated knows this, okay? Studies are to help us see something from a different angle. You know, it helps us to collect data and analyze that data in hopefully a logical manner. But studies are skewed a lot of times, all right? And they don't take into account factors that could really influence the outcome of what the studies are. So anyways, there you have it. Video games do not make people violent. They can, you know, anything can influence us, but nothing makes you do anything. You make your own choices, and that's just the way it goes. And anybody who wants to argue that is obviously a complete idiot. But anyways, many thanks for watching this segment of gaming news. Definitely check out Gamers Bay Community on Google+, where you can connect with thousands of other gamers. If you have a gaming channel of your own, check out the Gamers Video Archive community on Google+, where you can share and connect with other gaming channels. And we do promote a lot of the content that gets posted there. And until next time, take care.